Now at this point you may be thinking I just came here to slam no-till or back to Eden gardening, but that's not the case. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a spectacular day. It is Thursday, February 1st here in South Georgia, and on today's video I wanted to address a recent comment we got on one of our older videos about how to create a new garden spot in your backyard, comparing no-till methods versus kind of traditional cultivation methods. So this comment we got recently was on one of our older no-till videos from like 2 or 3 years ago, where we were talking about the progression of one of our no-till plots, and the commenter was disagreeing with what I said in that video about how no-till or back to Eden, whatever you want to call it, that style gardening is harder to set up in the beginning. So this commenter, who I believe was from across the pond because they were talking about temperature in Celsius, was saying that back to Eden garden is way cheaper, way easier to set up. He cited Charles Dowding, and I'm pretty sure he watched that Back to Eden garden documentary several times because he was reciting several of the bullet points they mentioned in that documentary. Now, if you haven't seen that Back to Eden documentary on YouTube, I'd recommend checking it out. It's pretty long, but it's very well done. Now, I don't agree with all the claims made in that video, but we're not going to get into that today. Today, I want to kind of look at things from, if we were going to take a spot in our backyard, make a new garden out of it, what would be cheaper and easier? A traditional cultivation method, or going a no-till / back to Eden route. Now, before we get into this, one of the things that I tend to find quite funny is that a lot of the armchair quarterback no-till proponents are people that don't have a tiller. So they want to talk bad about traditional cultivation gardening techniques because they don't have a tiller. I wonder if things might be a little different if they did own a tiller. I also see all the time these reels on Instagram, people claiming that their garden was just terrible using traditional in-ground gardening techniques, and once they went to Back to Eden, it just changed everything for them. They act as if traditional in-ground gardening is something that's just so hard to do, and Back to Eden makes it so easy. But I think a lot of that is people just not understanding how grass and weeds grow. In-ground gardening, the traditional cultivation way, is not that hard. There's just some basic principles you got to understand before you really get into it. So let's set the framework for our comparison here. Let's assume that we wanted to add one more 30 by 35 plot to our dream garden here, and we wanted to put it right there. Now, that probably wouldn't be the best spot for our garden because it's not really level, but let's just assume we wanted to put another spot right there where the grass is now. So first, let's talk about how we would do this kind of the traditional old school cultivation way. And this is the way I set up all our in-ground garden plots at some point. They weren't all set up at the same time, but this is the technique I used. So if we're wanting to go from grass to spring garden, probably want to start about 2 months in advance of when you're planning on planting. So right now, early February would be a great time to start if we were planning on planting in, say, April. So the first thing I would do with a spot in my yard like that is I would take my lawnmower and I would scalp it down as close as I could mow it. Now, all the grass is pretty dead. This time of year hasn't really started growing back yet, but I want that grass as low as possible before I start cultivating. And in my case, since I do have a tiller, I would crank it up. I would go out there and till up that spot that I wanted to be my spring garden. Now, if the soil was kind of dry, if we hadn't had any rain in a while, I would probably take an overhead sprinkler and soak that spot down really good. Make sure it's nice and moist, because the tiller is going to work a lot better in moist soil than it would really hard, dry soil. Now, if I didn't have a tiller or my tiller was broke down, I could still make it work. Grab this old field hoe right there, go out there and just chip away at it, flipping over that grass, kind of disturbing that grass. I've seen videos from people overseas building gardens like this all the time. They get in a row, 3 or 4 or 5 of them, one of these hoes like this, and man, they can knock out a plot pretty quickly. So after that initial cultivation, I'm then going to come in there every 1 to 2 weeks and cultivate it again. If I'm not getting any rain, I'm using the overhead sprinkler again, moisten up that soil before I cultivate it. And this is not taking a whole lot of time. A little 30 by 35 plot, you can run over that with a tiller in say about 20 minutes. So it's not like it's taking you half a day to do this every time you do it. So as you do those successive cultivations, you'll know that that grass gets broken up more and more, starts to die off, doesn't try to come back as much. You're also stirring up that weed seed bank. You get some water on that soil, weeds germinate. You're able to really decrease your weed seed bank over that 2 months of cultivation. And at the end of those 2 months, you're going to have a pretty nice grass-free, weed-free garden plot to work with. You should have broken up all those grass rhizomes with those cultivations. Should have gotten that weed seed bank nice and lowered. Now you're not going to have very biologically active soil, but that's something we can fix in the future. The first goal here is get rid of those weeds, get rid of that grass. So although some folks make in-ground gardening seem impossible, it's actually not that hard to turn a piece of yard into a nice spring garden plot. If you got a method of cultivation, it's only going to take you about 30 minutes every 1 to 2 weeks. Just got to start a couple months in advance. That's the kicker. The other kind of caveat to this is we're assuming you've got some decent dirt in your yard. If you live somewhere where it's just hard clay or you've got rocks everywhere, it's not going to be quite as easy. So now let's talk about how we would go from a grassy spot in our yard to a no-till plot. Well, the first thing we got to think about is what are we going to do with the grass? Because when spring rolls around, that grass is going to start growing again and may become a problem. So we need to figure out some way to try to kill the grass or try to reduce its growth. One way to do that would be with a tarp. Now this is going to take quite a while to go from yard to grass that's not going to come back, but it can be done. Another thing I've seen people use is cardboard. So they'll go out there and layer cardboard over where their garden spot's going to be, and then they'll start piling stuff on top of the cardboard. They call it lasagna gardening. Now I don't have to do this firsthand, but if I were to take cardboard and put it on that spot I showed you earlier, what would happen is that cardboard would get wet and it would start to break down, and when spring rolls around in a couple more months, that centipede grass and that Bermuda grass would grow right through that cardboard. But for the sake of this discussion, let's just say the cardboard stifles all the grass. Then we got to start sourcing things to layer on top of the cardboard. Compost, other organic matter, wood chips. Even if you're able to go get wood chips for free, we're not able to here. We just don't have huge stockpiles of wood chips, at some compound in the city there, but some places do. Even if you are able to get free wood chips, you still got to go pick them up, bring them back to your place and spread them. Still got to go get that compost, bring it back to your place and spread it. Maybe you've got your own compost, you still got to go out there and spread it. So we either tarp the plot to kill the grass, put down some cardboard, or just do some heavy layering to try and stifle the grass. That's going to take a decent amount of work. Even after we do all that, we still don't have this magical unicorn garden soil. We know from our own no-till plots that it takes several years to really get all that good soil biology churning. So in that first year, in my opinion, looking at the two different scenarios, it would take a lot more work to establish that no-till plot than it would be to go with the cultivation program I mentioned earlier. And in the first year, the soil's probably going to be pretty comparable performance-wise. You're still going to have to add a decent amount of fertilizer to either one to get some decent harvest from your plants. And that's not even considering the fact that with the first technique, the traditional cultivation technique, we have kicked the grass in the... Yet with the other technique, there's probably higher than an 80% chance that a lot of that grass is going to come back with a vengeance. Now at this point you may be thinking I just came here to slam no-till or back to Eden gardening, but that's not the case. I think the best solution lies somewhere in the middle. Now I can't remember his name, but a fairly well-known no-till proponent said one time, you should till until you don't have to till anymore. And I can't think of a better way to put it. So we went through those two different scenarios earlier, kind of those two different techniques for turning that spot of grass into a spring garden. Now let me tell you how I would use a combination of those techniques and really knock it out of the park. So with goal number one in mind, get rid of the grass and keep it from coming back, I would start out with that cultivation plan that I told you about earlier, because I know it works. We get people asking us all the time how we don't have grass all in our garden plots, and it has a lot to do with the fact that this is how we created our garden plots in the beginning. Yes, we have to weed around the edges, we have to maintain the borders, but we don't get grass growing up in the middle of our garden plots because we took that time in the beginning to just annoy that grass enough, disturb those rhizomes so it wouldn't come back. So I would till it every couple weeks over the next 2 months, like I told you earlier. But when I got ready to plant in spring, I wouldn't put compost over the entire plot, at least initially. What I would do is use our FAD system, and I would just put compost where my rows are going to be, so it could kind of feed just those plants there. I wouldn't be worried about the entire plot, because I may still have a little bit of a battle on my hand as far as the weed seed bank. May still need to do some cultivation. I don't want to throw a bunch of compost on top and then have to go back and cultivate all that. So we're just going to compost where our rows are going to be in the first year. And then once we have really good control over our weed situation, which we may achieve after one season, it may take several seasons, but once we are not just out there constantly fighting weeds, that's when we can compost the entire plot, add whatever organic matter we want to add over the entire soil surface, and then go to a minimal disturbance system. So we would till until we didn't have to till anymore. Once we've got that weed seed bank really reduced, we can put compost or whatever we want over the entire plot. We don't have to fight that many weeds, and we can really start building some healthy soil. A lot of people talk about how much tillage, how much damage tillage does to soil biology, but if we're just taking a spot of yard, there's probably not a whole lot of soil biology there in the first place. There's not a whole lot to damage, so to speak. So that's why we should just go ahead and take that opportunity, get rid of the grass, get rid of those weeds. Once we've done that, then start building our soil. So if you're considering adding a new in-ground garden plot to your backyard, think about these things before you just dive head first into the lasagna gardening or back to Eden gardening, whatever it may be. It's going to take you years to establish really nice biologically active soil. Considering it's not going to happen overnight, you might as well take the time, get rid of that grass and weeds for good. That way they don't become a nightmare down the road. And if you have any experiences with either of the techniques I mentioned, or maybe some combination of those techniques, please do share your experiences in the comments below. That way everybody can read them, everybody can learn, and everybody can decide what's the best route they should take. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and if you want to learn more about our kind of minimal disturbance system here and how we incorporate cover crops and the chicken tractor into the mix, watch this video here and we'll show you how we were able to get our corn plot ready last year with minimal disturbance. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.